Coming up with a little activity for us to do. Waiting to see who all gets on here, and then I did want to look at some of the regulations today. Of course, that didn't come, the document didn't get ready until tomorrow. So my thought is that we could each, I'll share the link with you. We'll each read a section of it, and then we can share out what some of the regulations are in neighboring states and programs. I'm referring to the document that Lucas sent out this morning, I think, attached to the agenda. But I'm also going to provide a link to the Google Doc, and I'm kind of giving you each a paragraph or so to read and report out to the group. So I'm almost done assigning names. I just want to make sure I don't over assign people here. So right now I have Kelly, Griff, Larry, Zach, me, Dave, me doing that. Did I miss anyone? I think that's everyone that is on the committee, right? Yes. Oh, girl. Did somebody, okay, so just read. I think I missed Craig in that list. All right.
I don't think you missed me.
Okay, I didn't. Oh, who did I miss then? All right. All right, let me run through it one more time. So right now I have Kelly, Griff, Larry, Zach, me, Dave. Did I get everyone in that first go round? Yes. And then follow up on that, me. I'm going to give Craig this little one. Craig, Kelly. So me, Craig, and Kelly are going twice, but I picked things that both Kelly and Craig know well. So, okay, let me share this with you. Share. And the link. and edit. Chat. All right, I just put the link into the chat, although I'm not seeing it. There it is. But welcome. Thank you for joining here. So our draft recommendations are the document itself is a bit of a mess right now, but we do have ideas and some text in there. I think by our next meeting, we'll really get into to looking at that document more closely. But if you are gung-ho to get started on it, then you can certainly take a look at the draft recommendations. Again, it's mostly the things that we've talked about in our meetings already, going back in terms of like the background, the stressors on eelgrass, etc. So before we get started, I just wanted to get a sense from people about the December 21st date. We were finding, I think we're having a hard time getting people that are available that day. And I'm wondering if we just skip that day. And actually, let me share my screen so you can see. Sorry, wrong share. I was sharing the Google Doc. Let's try again here. Screen 2. So my suggestion is to modify a little bit. We're here looking at kind of the policy and legislation and recommendations in neighboring regions and programs, reviewing those today. And then my suggestion is to move the monitoring and change analysis discussion to January 10th, along with engaging the community, which would then give us January 24th to discuss the final draft of recommendations. So we need to come up with kind of a summary by our recommendations and then discuss them on January 24th to have them in at the start of February. This would give us a little more time to get the text done prior to that January 10th meeting. But if but I need feedback. So is this too tight of a turnaround in terms of reviewing that draft is a question. My hope would be to have like everything that we've discussed thus far written up in that draft by December 21st, so that you could then have 2 weeks to kind of look at it and think about it. And then we would be discussing this, engaging with the community and monitoring change analysis report outs prior to the January 24th meeting. Any thoughts? Zach, go ahead if you want, if you have a, oh, I just lost Zach in mine. We can't hear you. I see you talking, but
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, there's a button on my. I don't know if this was decided yet or not, but I know Tessa and I both kind of suggested that we could be good for talking about engaging the community. I'm bringing this up because January 10th, we are both going to be at a Northeast Aquaculture Conference and unavailable. So if someone else is going to take that, that's fine. But if that is us, then we should probably not have that discussion that day because we both probably won't be there.
Yes. Just trying to see what other days we have available. Let me look real quick here. Sorry, guys. I don't have the link that we had set up to see how many people we have available. The issue with December 21st is that I think we only had 3 or 4 people that could attend that day, out of the 10 or so that are on the committee. We can try, let's do this. Lucas, we can send out another, like another poll and just see if maybe we can re-poll people on potential dates. and see if we can find some days. So Lucas and I will put that together and get that out, probably tomorrow, to folks. And, yeah, because we definitely want you here for that, Zach. I think you guys are the right one to lead that discussion. In fact, I'm going to write Zach, Tessa. Are you guys just gone January 10th or that whole week?
It's the conferences 10th, 11th, 12th. So
Okay.
Monday, Tuesday are okay. The rest of the week now.
Okay. Good to know. We'll take that into account when we're looking for dates. All right, so we'll poll again. We'll see if there's a time that could swap in for this December 18th, 19th, when people were not going to be available, and see when we might be able to get people online. All right, so on to the draft of policy legislation and recommendations. Along here, you'll find your name, like Kelly here is the first one up on the Long Island Sound study. So this document is arranged. Actually, I'll look at the table of contents here. So the document is arranged. I asked one of our interns to look at policies and legislations in neighboring regions and programs. We were asked to look at neighboring regions. So those are our neighboring states, New York, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. But I expanded that to also look at the estuary programs like the Long Island Sound Study, Peconic Estuary, et cetera. And then at the bottom, there are some additional state permitting reports related to eelgrass and aquaculture, which we probably won't get to today, but I think we might want to look at those and include them as we move forward. So to make this go a little faster, and so it's not just me relaying the whole document, what I did is I put your name next to a headings for instance, Long Island Sound Study, Kelly, Griff, Peconic Estuary Program. Oh, Bill, you are here. I will assign you one. Larry, South Shore Estuary Program. These are all roughly less than a page. And my thought was that we could each take a moment to read it right now, and then report out on the contents and what we think are relevant to this group. So if we take 5 to 10 minutes to each read our section, and then we come back and we can each report out on that section. Any questions, or is everyone able to link to get access to the document? All right, so Bill, you joined a little late, and I see you're on the phone potentially. I just want to make sure that you're able to access the document. Not getting anything back from Bill right now. All right, well, he's last on the list here. So go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing, and let's take about 5-10 minutes to read through this. If you're done, whenever you're done with your section and you feel like you're ready, go ahead and raise your hand, or just let me know. Oh, Alan, I see you joined. I'm gonna put your name next to something, to one of these two, and give that to you to discuss. I think Craig was down there twice. So Craig, I'm going to have you do the one that's above. And I will share the link one more time in case anyone came in late and doesn't have the link. Stop sharing. There we go.
So Jamie, you just turned my section into Alan's section. So which section do you want me to do?
Yep, I think yours is up above. I had assigned you two.
Okay.
I'm searching for you right now. No, apparently I took your section away completely, Craig. Hold on.
Oh, all right. No worries.
I'm gonna give you the whole last section, Craig. I will say, Craig, I don't expect you to report out on all of those the links to those state reports. But if you could perhaps give us a flavor of what some of those links are to, or what they might tell us, that would be a good way to approach that last section.
So Jamie, I don't see the link that you just sent.
Okay, it is in the chat, which should be, if you move your cursor,
Okay,
it
yeah.
should show up at the bottom. Yep, the chat option.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hear me?
Yes. Oh, there you are. Hi, Bill. Couldn't find you on my screen. Oh, I can't hear you now.
They're redoing the.
Oh, now I can't.
Really? Huh.
It's coming in and out. Yeah.
Now?
Oh, yes, it's just delayed.
Let me try just going on the computer from a hotspot from Old Lyme. Hughes.
So we are able to hear you. It's just not syncing up with your lip movement, but we can ignore that.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did you said you put the link in the chat?
Yes. I'm going to post it again just in case that makes it more viewable to you. And then just a reminder, whenever you feel ready, mine was easy because it was short and I gave myself a short one. Feel free to raise your hand and then I will know, that'll give me a sense when we're ready to start the discussion.
Amy, help me out on this hand raising.
Well, you took care of it. That's all you need to tell me. But it is at the bottom. There's a little smiley face that says reactions. And then the hand raising is in that. But everyone, please feel free to lower your hand. I think we'll get started. My hope is that we will, oh, did I not? I can't seem to lower my hand. There we go. So my thought was that, you summarize the section of that document. It's a fairly long document. It was about, I think, 13 pages or so, which is why I thought, let's all take a small section to summarize. No longer than 5 minutes. I'll cut you off at 5 minutes, and 1 minute is fine if yours can be done in 1 minute. So there's no minimum requirement of what you need to take to summarize this, but I will cut you off at about 5 minutes. So my hope with the report outs on this is that we're just sharing as a group kind of what is going on in Long Island Sound and our neighboring states and regions and programs. At the end of this, it's good to have a goal here. At the end of this, what we want to do is say, out of this document, what do we want to see happen in Connecticut? So what pieces of this do we think should be transported, adopted, used in Connecticut? So that's our goal. We'll probably take this 13-page document and put it in like an appendix as our recommendations. So we will be able to refer back to it, in our recommendations without putting all of this in there. But keep that in mind. What are you hearing today that you're like, wow, that's a really good idea and we should do that here in Connecticut? All right, so we're going to go with Kelly first, which is great because Kelly's awesome at giving overviews. So
Really?
Yes, you are. All right, so the way this is organized is we start with the estuary programs and then we get into the states, and then there were a lot of links. I gave Craig the hard job of summarizing like a million links on additional places for policy. So Kelly's going to start us off with a little overview of Long Island Sound study.
Okay. So, well, one item I think just to think about is the topic, preservation and restoration of eelgrass policy legislation and recommendations in neighboring regions and programs. So since Long Island Sound study is also Connecticut, New York, I thought maybe, local programs and neighboring regions. I would just maybe rethink that a little bit. I also thought, and I hope I'm not deviating too much, but a little introductory text about, what this section covers, and then maybe a map of locations. I'm not sure if a visual, would be good for folks to have to refer to. But basically the section about the Long Island Sound study focuses on the comprehensive conservation and management plan that was prepared in 2015. It was a 20-year plan at the time, with goals to 2035. There are reports of the accomplishments of the first 20 years, 1994 to 2014, which I think is really good to capture. And then there's the details in this section go into how eelgrass is addressed in the CCMP under these various themes, the way the CCMP is organized. So it is considered within the Clean Waters and Healthy Watersheds section as far as nitrogen pollution and the impacts of hypoxia eutrophication on eelgrass. Also for water clarity, which we know impacts eelgrass, and there is an ecosystem target to achieve a water clarity that supports healthy eelgrass communities. Within the next theme, the thriving habitats considers the restoration of eelgrass. So this is where we're looking at an increase of 2,000 additional acres based on a 2012 baseline by 2035. Let's see, they talked about the accomplishments. So there is a section in here about the technical explanation of the ecosystem targets, because there is more information available about how and why they're linked, like the water clarity, how that relates to eelgrass, and the relevance of the target to the 2,000 acres. So I happen to know that like there's other activities underway to address eelgrass. So I would question that we consider if we should note that, or if it should really just be what's in the document.
I actually think this is a great time to bring it up. So yes, please share and we can add them.
Okay, I'll just briefly mention, relative to the target of restoring the 2,000 acres, the Long Island Sound Study prepared the management and restoration plan, which includes certain research and management activities or actions. One in particular is the Eelgrass Collaborative, which was developed recently. And then there's also an action to look at seeding, basically the seeding stock, and how we can potentially harvest seeds from local meadows, or develop a seed bank, which would be more regional with other estuary programs. And that's also underway. Relative to, let's see, I think this is also relative to the ecosystem target of the 2,000 acres and the management plan. We have an initiative to conduct an intercomparison study of different methods to map eelgrass. So how frequently we would map eelgrass, it hasn't been done that frequently, but we're looking at flyovers versus drone technology. And the satellite, actually, there's also a method using satellites that's in the works. So over the next couple of years, that's going to be explored. I don't know if I missed anything else.
That sounded like all of it to me.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then we also have the CCMP is coming up for revision this year with a goal of being completed for rollout in 2025. So that might be important to note.
Yeah, let me jot that in. So CCMP new version rolling out in 2025. And I did notice that there was a recent call, at least to the scientific community, to participate in advisory groups in the writing of that new CCMP. I feel like those advisory groups are open. So if anyone on this group was like, I really want to have input on the CCMP, I believe now's a great time. That email just came out, I want to say yesterday or the day before. So they are just looking for that input right now.
Right. There is a link to sign up. So I'll put my contact information in the chat. If anybody wants that information, I can email it to you. Just contact me.
Excellent. Thank you.
And
All
that's
right. Yes, I believe. Oh, Bill,
I'm delayed here. It
Bill,
went out to the
start,
CAC
Bill.
as well.
Bill, we were getting like every third word. Try one more time.
Okay. That all out is for people, not just the scientific community, anyone, the Citizens Advisory Committee as well.
Yes, it is. It's for partners to participate. There's a sign up area for folks to put in their name and to be picked to serve on the committees based on the major topic areas of the CCMP.
Yeah, and as I understand, you get to pick your topic, or you get to say, I am interested in this topic area. So you're not just blanket volunteering to do the whole thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next section. So I think Griff has this one.
Yeah, so I was looking at the Peconic Estuary Program, just reading about the like milestones from 2000 to 2019. Then I was looking at 2009 with the Bullhead Bay Eelgrass Sanctuary. So it was like the westernmost eelgrass bed, and they were specifically focused on protecting and preserving the eelgrass there. And then I was also looking at Action 30. So that read like monitor and protect existing eelgrass beds, and then also like where appropriate, restore and expand the eelgrass just to like help the population. And then also they were talking about a seagrass bio-optical model, which and sustainability model, which was created to like help the environment, to help environmental requirements such as light and temperature for the eelgrass. And then it could also be helpful to use and find potential sites for eelgrass expansion and restoration. And then they were also implementing BMPs and management areas, or they were talking about it to be developed and implemented to help protect the eelgrass. And then they were also conducting research like with areas of study, including the eelgrass traits, population genetics, and groundwater influences on eelgrass health. And they're looking at the potential positive, which was the cooling effect, and the negatives, which was pest and herbicide impacts. And then, yeah. I think you're muted.
Thanks, Griff. Yes, I was muted. What do we think of the sanctuary idea? I had not heard of this idea until, just now. Any thoughts on eelgrass sanctuaries? I don't even know what that would look like, but
I think that it was interesting too when I read this just quickly. I was briefing through it before the meeting, and I thought that is really interesting because it's a great awareness, public awareness opportunity, because it's acknowledged and it's mapped and it's an actual place. So
yeah, and it almost seems like Kelly, you were just talking about the seeding effort, and I know one of the concerns with collecting seeds to go and restore eelgrass is, are we harvesting too many seeds? Like I could see setting aside a sanctuary for seed collection and a sanctuary that the whole sanctuary idea or identifying seed collection areas, I think they mesh together. I'm just not sure how that would look as we move forward with restoration efforts.
yeah, it's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah. The other thing that I have only peripherally been aware of was the seagrass bio-optical model. So having it here, bringing that up again. I know about habitat suitability models, but they, in the Peconic Estuary specifically, were really interested in those temperature effects and light, both of which are issues that we have in our very shallow waters. All right, so on to Larry.
Unmute. Okay. In terms of the South Shore Estuary Program, the section highlights 5 action areas that have been completed. If you go back to the source document, there's a heck of a lot more information and recommendations, pretty specific. Just as an example, I just threw some in the chat about specific outcomes, et cetera. So I think there's 2 pieces. One is these are things that were done, and I'll quickly review those. But there's a lot of data in the New York State document which we could appropriate, is the right word, to to utilize. I think they did a nice job on the issues and put in actions related against all those issues. Now, in this specific subset, if you look at the 5 programs, you know, the Suffolk County is stormwater improvements, septic upgrades. So it really deals with, you know, some of the source of pollutants. The Shinnecock Bay restoration is more on education and, you know, restoration and putting new oyster gardenings or beds in place. The next section of the New York State Seagrass Protection Act, kind of what you said before, a designation of seagrass management areas. So I think it's just the term you can use, you know, a variety of things, but identifies the specific areas and what has to happen or what is limited in that area. The SAV mapping, again, it's the benthic habitat mapping approach. And then the last one was Cornell Cooperative, which was a seeding program. So there's kind of 5 different actions that have been completed, but the comprehensive set of actions is in the source document. So I'm not sure what you want to do with that. I'll leave that kind of open for discussion.
Yeah, I think if, you know, what we have in this document is a summary, and if there's something that we're like, that sounds like a good idea for Connecticut, we can go and dig a little deeper into that source material and see what they have in terms of more material.
Okay, so I guess I'll volunteer
Okay.
to go through the New York State one and pull out. Like I said, there's a lot there, so I want to limit it to, I don't know, the top 10 or something, rather than
Yeah.
they've got like 50 or 60 recommendations in there. So let me take an action to take the top 10 from the New York State plan, and I'll provide that back to, what's the right mechanism? Provide it back through Lucas?
Yeah, I think it could go to Lucas, and then if you CC me and Lucas, that would be great.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So did anything that Larry just reviewed, like does any of that strike a chord with anyone in terms of, yes, that sounds like something we should review? I will say the seagrass management areas, I would like to know more about those, because I think in my mind, I just think of, oh, seagrass is out there, and I'm liking this idea of management areas or reserves or protection for certain beds. Yeah. Anything else that stood out to other people that we should look into a little further? All right, I'm going to keep us moving along then. Thank you, Larry, for checking into that a little more, in a little more detail there. All right, on to Zach.
All right, so my section was pretty quick. It talks about the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program and kind of a little history of what eelgrass was like in there, where they're at now, and what things they have tried and what has worked and hasn't worked. So according to the document, eelgrass was once widespread in Narragansett Bay, and because of wasting disease and water quality, they say it has declined to right around 400 acres that are remaining. And then in the 90s up until early 2000s, they attempted to do some restoration by just seeding some areas. They got really low results on that of success. So they decided to move towards transplanting by hand shoots of eelgrass, and that's become the preferred method that they use now. They just still say those long-term results are mixed at best. So they suggest focusing on improving the water quality in Narragansett Bay. to help the shoots that they do plant survive. So I think now they're kind of heading towards doing more in the nutrient management part of it, as opposed to a restoration work of planting a new seagrass. So that's kind of my read on it. And I'll leave it there for discussion.
All right, thank you. It actually, that brings up a point that I would like to discuss briefly. And it is this idea of this balance between improving water quality and eelgrass success. I'm not going to say restoration, because it could be that we are going out to restore eelgrass. And I think that that's what a lot of people in Connecticut want to try. At this point, we feel like our water quality has gotten better. That's what it seems to indicate. We've certainly put a lot of effort into improving water quality over the last 20 years. And so now the question is, are we at a point where we can make a big push to like manually jumpstart eelgrass restoration versus letting it happen naturally? Any thoughts on how do we want to address that in our recommendations? I think we want to say, we've seen improving water quality, this is the time to try restoration. But do we want to offer these other viewpoints that you know, that there is this option of allowing kind of a natural regrowth of eelgrass, which takes a long time, by the way. It takes 15 to 20 years for eelgrass to kind of reestablish in a site that doesn't have any eelgrass, assuming you have a seed supply. And that's the big issue, is you have to have eelgrass seeds coming into the area for it to actually take root. So any thoughts? Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, because if you kind of, that charts we talked about where you have pollution levels, where, you know, you get some point that says seagrass can now grow,
yeah,
but the water quality is not going to be consistent along the sound. So I would say that where the water quality is below that arbitrary line we pick, yeah, you push maybe for more natural one where you kind of help it, you know, do some seeding. But in the other areas, focus more on getting the water quality up, because why seed in an area that water quality isn't good? You know, that doesn't make things move forward. So I think it seems to me a mix of both need to be in there.
I agree. Any other thoughts? I'm jotting that down right now.
I also just want to throw in one comment, not necessarily related to this section, but I think really thinking about like the soil types and if they're conducive to seagrass growth is also something that should really be taken into consideration before, you know, doing these restoration projects and adding seeds or shoots if it's somewhere that the sediment, you know, won't allow seeds.
Yeah.
So I did forget to mention, as far as initiatives, but with the Habitat Suitability Index model being updated, that's hopefully going to help to determine those areas where, you know, you can decide, okay, this water quality looks good, maybe try seeding there, maybe that would work. Look at the sediments, maybe that's, you know, decent there, or other actions you need to take. But I did forget to mention that, so that might be good to include. I don't know about if there's an opportunity, this might not be the section, but like a review of relevant research projects. Do we have that already covered?
I don't think we do.
All right.
I'm going to make a note to add it in. I also I know that Narragansett Bay has had issues with using seed-based restoration, but I have a feeling that their seed-based restoration, like I can't exactly recall where it is, but Narragansett Bay is almost like I think of it as like trying to restore eelgrass around Clinton, Connecticut. It's right on that edge of, is the water quality good
Mhm.
enough? So it may have been that their water quality wasn't quite where it needed to be when they put those seeds in. Then they moved to transplanting whole plants, adult plants. And then that worked, but maybe it was a combo of
Yeah.
water quality had improved a little more. So suffice it to say, I think we should look into those results a little bit more to find out what their timeline was in terms of relative to their water quality improvement efforts. So they did do a huge investment in reducing nitrogen from sewer in Narragansett Bay. But I feel like that happened in 2007 was when they finally got their nutrients down low, which is, it looks like based on this document here, yeah, eelgrass seeding was attempted in 2001. So it might have been just a little too early of an attempt for them.
And I think it was mentioned in Chesapeake Bay, it's not a one and done. It was like 10 years or something until they started to see,
Yeah.
positive results, like feeling very confident with that seeding effort.
That's a
I
good,
think the timeline is what Kelly just mentioned, this 10-year. In the text I had sent you, Jamie, that was one of the recommendations was, having this what is our expectation for success and what's the timeline? I think that's a really important message to convey through whatever document that we create, because it gauges expectations appropriately. If the state is going to commit resources to doing this, they really should be under no illusion that it's going to, happen the next year. Right? You should see success in the next year.
yeah. Just jotting that down.
And you do have Bill's two pilot seeding projects, one in Clinton and one in Westbrook, that's ongoing. So,
Yeah.
Within the next couple of years, you'll see the success of what is the water quality impacts there in terms of that.
Yeah, and those are great areas because we know that there is no source of natural seeds to those areas. So that they're the places that won't recover on their own. They need the help of a seed source. All right, I believe I am up next. And this was referring to the Connecticut National Estuarine Research Reserve Management Plan, which is my day job, is with the reserve. The reserve was established in the summer of 2022, but we had been working on getting it established since 2016, at least in this most recent go round that was successful in getting the reserve established. As part of that, we wrote a 5-year management plan, and eelgrass was mentioned prominently throughout the management plan. A few highlights is that eelgrass is considered an important habitat by the reserve system nationwide, and it was one of the critical habitats that we were interested in preserving in the as mentioned in the management plan for the reserve. The goal of the reserve is to collaborate in ongoing restoration efforts, eelgrass being one of them. Also, the reserve is interested in shellfish and salt marshes, recognizing that all of these habitats, shellfish, oyster reefs, shellfish habitats, salt marshes, and eelgrass beds are all interconnected. So the reserve is also interested in assessing the ecological effects of restoration. So they are a source of not just let's get the restoration done, but kind of a group that is interested in looking at what happens when we restore a system. How successful are we? And that's one of the things that the reserve can offer is that long-term monitoring and kind of assessment of how successful restoration has been. The reserve identified a number of pressing research issues, and eelgrass was among them. Both eelgrass loss, but then also using eelgrass as a sentinel species. and along with birds, crabs, flounder, certain iconic species that help us communicate the issue to the public. It's hard to hold up a microscopic copepod and say, this is why you should reserve the sound. Whereas it's much easier to hold up someone with a fishing pole and a flounder and say, this is why we should restore the sound. Not that the copepods aren't important, but they're not the best poster child. So that's one of the focuses of the reserve, is kind of that education piece as well. I think the others, I'll address it. I think the other thing that hasn't come up in other places is concerns about what is impacting eelgrass and marsh grass, including the impact of humans. So boat wakes and human disturbance on eelgrass was also brought up in the management plan. So the reserve is committed to, within the first 5 years, focusing on tidal marsh restoration and eelgrass restoration. And then they called out a couple sites specifically. So that's Mumford Cove. And I think Pequannock Cove was also called out. Those are 2 areas that are located in the reserve boundaries that either have eelgrass now, in the case of Mumford Cove, or have had it in the past, which is Pequannock Cove. So I think the thing to highlight in terms of the reserve is that it is an organization that is looking to partner with restoration efforts, and also has the capacity to do monitoring and to do long-term monitoring of both restored sites and then reference sites. Any other thoughts? All right. We're going to move into the states now. And so Dave, if you could please give us a highlight of New York.
I didn't find anything significant there, which is kind of interesting that in Connecticut it appears, we have more protections. I mean, it's a little confusing because New York's shellfish program is, other than in the Pequannock and out east there, is not very similar to Connecticut's program. And so when you look at some of that statutory language regarding shellfishing, it's distinguishing between, commercial harvest using, either regular dredges or hydraulic dredges on the bottom, as opposed to areas that were set aside just for hand digging, which Rhode Island has some of the similar areas. But so for a layman reading it, they don't understand exactly what that, the intent of it is. And the intent was to separate the public commercial digging areas from the private hydraulic or regular dredge areas. So I think in terms of our protections for eelgrass under aquaculture, much stronger than what they have there. I didn't find anything useful there.
Keep finding my unmute button. Thanks, Dave. So I would characterize it as I'm just taking notes here. Not a whole lot of protection for eelgrass, and focuses more on the differences. Any other thoughts or questions for Dave in New York? Yeah, I find it interesting. I also feel like New York's seagrass task force was a while ago. I'm forgetting the time frame, but I want to say it came out like more than 10 years ago. And I don't know that they've returned to the state has not returned to do anything more.
They have though. So
okay.
So can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Bill.
Normal computer.
Oh, now we can't hear you.
What the?
Well, we can hear you, but it was like a robot staticky thing. Try one more time, because when you were just saying that, you were coming through. Now we don't,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes.
Wow, it's really bad.
Nope, we're getting the robot voice again. All right, what I'm gonna ask, Bill, is if you jot down your thoughts so that we can either come back to them maybe when your connection's a little better, or if not, we could add them in the into the document. Oh, I just cleared that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I was still on my phone. I'm just juggling like 3 meetings at the same time, but I got this one. We're here now. So yeah, so in 2009, because I did some research on that, that was when they were really into their seagrass, and then it kind of went away for, like you said, about 10 years or so. But they just made an announcement they just hired a new seagrass coordinator for New York about 6 months ago. And they've been in touch with us. I don't know. I think they may have come to the collaborative meeting, Jamie, at the last one, but they're brand new. And I think that there was recognition that the state needed, the DEC needed to get back in the game. That being said, I also hear there's a bit of a hold on eelgrass work, at least the Peconic estuary. And I think the thought in that part of New York, and I think the thought there is that I think they're waiting for the collaborative to kind of get everything organized and get things standardized so everybody's on the same page, similar to what we're doing here. I don't know if they've been having regular seagrass meetings in New York, though. They do have a coordinator now.
Okay, so I'm characterizing it as they've been a little quiet. The state has been a little quiet, not everybody, but the state has been a little quiet, and are getting back in the game.
Yeah, it's been all Cornell and Stony Brook, Cornell Extension. Yeah.
Okay, and Bill, you're up next.
Oh, all right. So I drew the Rhode Island card, and one of the links was the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council, and the other one is the Rhode Island Coastal Estuarine Land Conservation Plan, and there's some regulations in there. So come on. So there was a direct wording. This is from Title 650 of the Coastal Resources Management Council, which I assume is advising the Coastal Management Program, the CZMP, 1972. And they have proposed, they're specifically picking out the aquaculture. Proposed aquaculture leases may not be sited where eelgrass, and they list both of Zostera and Rupia, and the eelgrass and the widgeon grass exists. And from the submerged aquatic vegetation part of the Rhode Island Coastal Resource Management Program, they list all the different things that need to stay away from eelgrass, either to preserve it, protect it, or where possible, if there's an impact, they have to try and restore it. So that's residential, commercial, industrial, any kind of structures, any kind of marinas, boating facilities, any outfall sewage treatment, dredging, any filling of tidal waters, and then aquaculture has its own section here. So it seems like it's probably very similar. There we go. To Connecticut, I'd imagine, is like if there's eelgrass here, you can't do anything without mitigation, is what I'm assuming. And they prefer not to permit things that are in existing areas. And I meant, like, from before, there's only 400 acres in Narragansett Bay. It would probably be, they could utilize the coastal program to prevent any activity going on there. So it seems fairly protective.
All right, thank you, Bill. Any thoughts on Rhode Island? Anything we want to take away from there?
I just have one comment of something to kind of think about. This is kind of seems like the right time and section to bring it up in.
Yep.
I know a lot of other states have dealt with situations where aquaculture is already permitted and eelgrass encroaches into it. I just think we should have something that talks about that situation and what the regulations would be in that case, so that it's not unknown, and it's not like, you know, if eelgrass is approaching into your farm, you have to get rid of your farm, which has happened in other states. So that's just something I think we should be thinking about.
Could I take that one step further, Jamie? So
Yep, go right ahead.
not only that, but as businesses, aquaculture businesses are always looking, are they going to expand in the future? So what about, you know, yeah, I agree. There needs to be something along those lines to let's say we restore an area on someone's shellfish lease, and then that takes the lease out of their ability to utilize it. That leaseholder is not going to have any incentive to let us use their lease to restore an eelgrass bed, for example. So not only the existing or eelgrass coming into an existing lease, but potential future leases, there needs to be the work like Jamie's going to be undertaking at BB Cove, where we can look at you know, cage aquaculture, certain types of aquaculture that may be able to coexist with existing or future restored status of that area.
I'll just mention that's primarily Craig's project. I'm just helping.
Oh, all right. Craig's project.
Yeah.
Which is a good one, because I mean, you probably aren't going to want to have an area that is being dredged. That's not going to be compatible. But if there's suspended aquaculture, flepsies, or something along that line, it may be the impact may be acceptable or minimal.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really important question, is this idea of what do other states do about this? I also feel like it's not an easy question to get at. You know, no one has pulled all that information for us together.
Yeah, there's a little bit of reference to that in a couple of the docs.
Yeah.
But it definitely does not stand out.
Yeah.
But we can mine a few of these docs for some information.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, for future recommendation, to Jamie's point about an active management plan with potentially sanctuaries, existing areas, or preserves, seed management collection areas, you know, leases that could be restored, but with aquaculture, just a mosaic, a more holistic management program than just don't do it here.
Yeah. All righty. Next up is Alan.
Oh, let me unmute myself here. I've taken on the Long Island Sound Blue Plan, and it's pretty clear that our efforts fall within this plan. The purpose of the Blue Plan is to facilitate transparent, science-based decision-making process for the preservation of Long Island Sound's ecosystems and resources. It's pretty clear that's what we're trying to facilitate, and the Blue Plan also identifies policies that regulate agencies' use and decision-making under their existing authority. I've not seen the Blue Plan, so that's probably some homework that I have to do. It's been interesting in listening to the dialogue this afternoon about the possibility of sanctuary areas for seed and for restoration. I certainly like that idea. I did some work with Dr. Fred Short out of the University of New Hampshire. This was back in the late 90s. He was doing some work in New Bedford Harbor and restoring eelgrass. And his technique was with a cage system to tie eelgrass root systems that had been harvested elsewhere to the cage and leaving it on the bottom for a period of time for those roots to establish themselves, and also for the ties, which were made out of paper. We made them, and for those to disintegrate and then to retrieve the cage. I did some work in Little Narragansett Bay using that technique in the late 90s. I tried to get some funding in order to do that, but because of the nutrient loading out of the Pawcatuck River, I was not able to convince the powers that be to allow us some funding for that effort. So we did it on our own. We just spent several summers with students in the summertime through Pine Point School, doing some work to try to reestablish some of the what were vast eelgrass beds in Little Narragansett Bay. Those vast eelgrass beds existed in the 70s and 80s and have since disappeared. That's a little bit off of my topic of the Long Island Sound Blue plan, but it certainly sounds as if we fall right under that plan, this effort by this committee. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Alan. Yeah, I think the blue plan is useful. It is marine spatial planning. It has an online, which is great. And so it will let you overlay competing uses within areas to view them. So I think that's a potential source of kind of looking at what's happening in the Eastern Sound in our report. So the next section.
Just one quick comment on the blue plan, Jamie, is just to note it's only at 10-foot depth or deeper.
Yes,
So-
that is true. Yeah.
So it does have information in the shallower areas, which is useful, but it's not supposed to be enacted or considered shallower than 10 feet.
Yeah. Which a lot of our eelgrass is in that, right at that 10-foot mark currently. So Kelly, I don't know if you saw that I had put your name next to this one as well.
I did. I hadn't reviewed it too closely, but I did have a discussion earlier this week with Katie and Emily and a few other people in the office. But real quick, I don't know if the blue plan should be under the Connecticut heading and all of it on its own, as opposed to being under, what do we have under?
Yeah,
Neighboring states or something.
it's a weird spot. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It should move. I'm gonna write a comment.
Well, it actually is. It's in there twice.
Okay.
That's what it was. Yeah, I did notice that. So for the state regulations in our agency, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, basically it's like Connecticut General Statutes 22A, environmental protection, includes the Coastal Management Act.
Mm-hmm.
So that Coastal Management Act is one of those sections with the title coastal navigable wetlands and structures, dredging and fill. So they're all equal. So it almost the way it's presented now, it looks like the
Yeah,
Coastal Management Act is the overarching act, but it's not. It's all environmental protection, Title 22A. We went over that too the other day. But the Coastal Management Act, I think we're getting more information on this as far as it's really like policies that are applied during reviews of activities in the coastal zone, coastal boundary. And this one's interesting because it does also mention eelgrass directly.
mhm.
So we're getting a little more information on that. Structures, dredging, and fill is applicable for, just like Phil said, in Rhode Island, it's, avoidance of submerged aquatic vegetation, which includes eelgrass. And so that's one of it's implemented in policy during the permit application review process. The title, let's see, the tidal wetlands is a little more upland. We really don't think that, let's see, the way that these are spelled out is a little bit strange. Yeah. Yeah, so that one, the Tidal Wetlands Act, it's a little more upland, and we really don't think that applies to eelgrass. And then coming down to the Public Act from 2002, I think it may have been just revisited in 2022. I saw another date with that as well before. That's an interesting one we're not really aware of, and there has been no movement as far as a regulation, just for the protection and restoration of eelgrass. So where
Which
there's
one was that?
sorry,
Which one was that?
that's the 2002 Public Act.
Oh, yes, I see it. I got it.
Yeah. So even though that's on the records, there's no movement towards, or there is no regulation adopted in that area that's specific for eelgrass. Where we do consider eelgrass is in the coastal management for coastal zone reviews and for the structures, dredge, and fill for permit applications. We talked a little bit too about water quality, and basically, eelgrass is considered within the water quality standard regulations. So that's something that we can maybe consider if we're going to include that as well. But where it's not specifically mentioned in the regulations, but it's aquatic regulations are intended to protect habitat for fish and aquatic life. So we establish criteria that's protective of fish and aquatic life, so that aquatic life portion is where the eelgrass and other submerged aquatic vegetation fits in. Future plans are to look at developing where we have narrative criteria in those regulations, where it's not like has specific for clarity or for chlorophyll. Looking at a translator, a process to translate the narrative into numeric that would then be applicable to eelgrass and clarity and other types of symptoms from too much nutrients. And then moving to the House bill, that's us. That's what we're working on now. Connecticut House Bill 6480. And then Alan had just talked about the Blue Plan.
Sorry, still taking notes.
Okay.
Any questions or comments or ideas on this? Anything that we might want to highlight in our recommendations? All right, then in our last few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Craig, who had the million links.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Jamie. I think it was only like 5,000 pages to review.
Yeah.
Um, so I did that by basically searching for eelgrass in any of these documents. And really, it's kind of a mixed bag across these that are either covering ground that we've already talked about that's going to be in there, sort of background information. I can just go through these pretty quickly. The review of Connecticut aquaculture, not particularly useful. Mapping, citing leases, SAV and suitable shellfish habitat. We've kind of covered that ground. The Connecticut aquaculture permitting guide was very useful, probably one of the more useful documents. This is the one that Tessa and David contributed to. A lot of different elements in here, including, the setback and the prohibition on harvest within eelgrass beds, as well as mentioning project modifications as needed if eelgrass encroaches. New York Seagrass Task Force, that's 2009. Pretty generic, not super useful, I didn't think. Rhode Island Coastal Plan, also pretty generic, basically says eelgrass is good, not super useful. Rhode Island Title 650 has some specifics on identifying no co-location of eelgrass and aquaculture, as well as some guidance on siting docks, floating and fixed in relation to eelgrass. Moving on to Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Aquaculture White Paper. One interesting thing it highlighted was kind of less stringent guidance on the co-location of aquaculture and eelgrass, rather than specific setback or outright prohibition. It talks about an assessment of no adverse effect. And, that leaves a little bit of latitude, I think, in terms of how you might consider these things on a case-by-case basis, both in terms of siting and in terms of any kind of modifications to aquaculture operations, if in fact you do end up getting more eelgrass. So there is a precedent for more of a case-by-case review. Massachusetts eelgrass restoration. This is more of a case study compilation. It includes the cage system that Alan had mentioned. And one thing that I found notable for this was that it does specifically address success criteria for a restoration, which I think is something that I think would be a fairly critical recommendation if we can come to a consensus on, what does success look like for restorations.
Was that the Mass Division or was that New Jersey?
That was Mass.
Okay.
That was the Mass Eelgrass Restoration Doc.
Yep.
It's a bunch of case studies.
Yeah.
New Jersey Aquaculture something document, not useful. Barnegat Bay document, not useful. Moving on to the multi-state stuff. Some of these documents were pretty good. They were one stop, especially the very last one. The evaluation of shellfish aquaculture permitting systems. That was really a very succinct bullet point summary of some of the topics we've been talking about, in a state by state description, so you can very easily compare how they're different. Some of these topics are different state by state. Yeah, highlighting, that regional management of SAV through permitting by U.S. Army Corps has some variability to it, depending on district to district. So there are some examples that you can, provide, a spectrum of what the Army Corps' perspective is on these. Yeah, and it's examples of different buffer zones and prohibitions. So I think these multi-state documents could be compiled into, a nice one-stop shopping bulleted or table that it sort of points out where Connecticut lies currently, across this broader swath of how people have dealt with similar conflicts and topics regarding SAV.
Great.
And that's it for me.
Thank you. I realized I was unmuted while typing. Sorry. Any comments, thoughts as we round out our time right now? This is a very good summary of a lot of information there, Greg.
So the section right above section 3 there.
Yep.
So, which we sort of skipped, but so even that says from the 2019 guidance, but that goes all the way back to 2003. And my recollection at those meetings was those were, task force or work group meetings following the 2002 bill. And I think Peter Francis led most of this, but so in lieu of adopting this as regulation, we adopted this as policy, between DEEP, ourselves, and Army Corps, and we've followed that policy. And in 2003, my only question and I think you know that because you did your short-term temporary cage placement study somewhere within that time frame, right? So
Yeah.
How little bit of eelgrass was pretty sparse at that point. And so now we're 20 years later, we followed this policy up until 5 years ago, where the eelgrass has just invaded, large areas down in Groton and Stonington, which happen to be the areas that all the shellfish cages were placed in, where there wasn't eelgrass within 25 feet 20 years ago. And so, now Army Corps uses its discretionary authority to not take action, as well as DEP and ourselves, because what is the point of taking action to move shellfish cages off of a lease that's been totally inundated with eelgrass, especially if the cages themselves are part of the trap, that's holding seed in the area, as opposed to it just being pulled out of the area. So I think, that's a really important section that has just been policy, but has had, a significant impact down there based on the fact that in that time period, we also updated 3 Stonington sewage treatment plants, that have an impact. So you do have to connect a lot of the dots.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think one of the things we should consider is, obviously we can make recommendations for changes. We can also make recommendations to maintain the kind of permitting allowances as they are right now. So that is something to think about in that question of what are we doing in terms of policy and legislature with regards to that eelgrass aquaculture interaction. I think we're charged with looking at eelgrass restoration broadly, but one of the questions is, how do we permit this? How do we create a regulatory environment that allows for eelgrass restoration without putting an undue burden on other uses of the sound, whether that's aquaculture, recreational shellfishing, boating, diving, etc. Yeah.
Right. We adopted it when there was a crisis.
Yeah.
And then fortunately we've addressed some of the contributors to the crisis. And now we have a terrific rebound there. And now the policies we adopted are in conflict. That doesn't mean as you move westward, the policies aren't important. Because if there is a new patch of eelgrass that's started in Westbrook, obviously you don't want to dampen that out. So the policies are still good, but the question is, when do they become irrelevant in a certain area?
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, Dave. What Craig found in Massachusetts, because the problem with policies are right. It depends on who's at the Army Corps office. It depends on who's in your seat in the future. And the shellfishing community wants to have, you might have managers that are flexible now, but you don't know who's going to come tomorrow. So I think one of the tasks that we have to do is set something that's clear to allow that flexibility of managers. I don't know if I'll say in statute since the policy seems to be working, but you know what I'm driving at? It's like, how do you write that down so it's protected activity in the future?
I think though, from what David is saying, in this element of a case by case basis, that I agree that you want to, codify policy to some extent, but you also want to codify flexibility of where and when to apply that policy, or, some altered version of that policy. And I think that is a trick, to pull off, and what kind of language you use. One thing that did come out of the very first Connecticut aquaculture document that I reviewed, which might lend itself to this discussion or maybe not, is, this idea of a recommendation that they had for creating, small experimental leases. And those small experimental leases the language was really for the development of, different shellfish species per se, but you could extend that argument in parallel or in analogy that, if you wanted to explore and inform these conflicts a little bit more, you might be able to do it through, an internal review or some kind of parallel permitting process that is very different in nature for, a small scale test of something versus, a full blown, larger operational sort of endeavor.
Which state did you say that was, Craig? Do you remember?
That was the very first Connecticut document.
Okay.
And it just said small experimental leases, but, I kind of extrapolated that interpretation to something that might be morphed into what the charge of this committee is.
Jamie,
And I don't know, do you know the date of that document? So I think it predates me, but
It seemed pretty old, yeah.
yeah. So the problem is, somewhere around the mid-90s to halfway to the end of there was a big change where there was a lot of aquaculture that was going into the water without permits. And so, a lot changed by the time, 2003 came around. So, a lot of the earlier aquaculture in the 90s did not have the necessary permits that it was supposed to have.
I see, yep.
And so if you go into the early statutes in 22, you'll see, I think they're dated about 98 was when they came into play, where the legislature corrected and clarified some of that, and created an exemption for aquaculture that we ran with for, I think, 18 years or so, even though there was an incorrect area in there. And that was, DEP was just able to clean that up in the last few years.
Jamie, one of the things that I'd like to comment on with this thought of reestablishment of eelgrass on licensed or leased beds by aquaculturists. One of the concerns that I would have is that the aquaculturists, that's their livelihood. And if there's anything that we do that preserves their ability to use that leased or licensed plot, I think is important, so that they once they've established their growing area, and eelgrass begins to reform in that area, we would not want those aquaculturists moved off of that area just because of eelgrass. I mean, it is their livelihood that is at consideration here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Trying to capture that.
Jamie, I don't want to stop the conversation, but I do have to go, so I'm going to sign off. But happy
That's
to be
perfect.
here.
I was just
See you guys
about to
next
wrap
time.
it up. Unless there are last parting thoughts that you desperately want to get down into this document right now.
Well, just next to that last comment, I gotta jump in. So the consideration is an aquaculture lease, if it's all the aquaculture activities in Madison, Connecticut, create an opportunity for eelgrass to reestablish itself on a small portion of that lease. We do think it's in the benefit that we stay 25 feet away and allow that eelgrass to develop and spread outside of that area, because that small section of the lease, yes, is an imposition, but it's not going to put the person out of business, and it could help, create eelgrass. So it's not an easy solution to any of this. Okay, obviously, if it covers a whole lease, letting the guy farm and dampening some of it is not a big deal. But as we recolonize it heading westward, it may be that those are the areas that it pops up on, where there's lots of shellfish, where you have higher water quality. And so, do you want to protect those small areas or allow them, to be immediately destroyed? And so I don't know because if you create language protecting them, then they accidentally get destroyed. Okay, so but I think there should be some protections if we actually wanted to naturally recruit westward.
So
Temporary protections,
Yeah. So I'm writing down, we need some protections as eelgrass extends into or recolonizes previously uncolonized areas. But I think what I'm hearing from everyone is that we generally need to ensure that there is flexibility, that there's a recognition that that we can't make one rule and it applies everywhere. And maybe that's what we're kind of zeroing in on in this idea that protecting eelgrass is important, but in areas where eelgrass is healthy and thriving, perhaps those protections are relaxed a bit. And then in areas where we are just getting eelgrass regrowth, the protections are a little stronger until that eelgrass is established. And so maybe that's, in a nutshell, what we're zeroing in on. And maybe our recommendations are almost a series of if-then statements. We won't write them as if-then statements, but the idea that, that there are going to be different responses based on locations. And maybe we have some guiding principles for what should be considered where and when and for how long. And maybe that's what we're getting to in our recommendations. Does that characterize it generally well?
I think so. I think Brad could probably help us out with torturing the language to fit that into a bill.
Yeah, that's the next step. Yeah. All right. Well, then I'm going to say thank you all for your involvement tonight. Excellent discussion. You'll be hearing from Lucas and me tomorrow, just trying to see if we can find a time in December where we can capture, especially Zach and Tessa's time to lead the next discussion. So we're going to try to aim for ideally another meeting in December and then 2 in January. But if we can't settle on the December time, then we'll be looking for just 2 meetings in January. All right. Thank you all.